Hello and welcome to Friends and Neighbors. I'm Sandra O'Neill, joined here by wonderful Sherry Tatum.
Oh, yes.
My co-host, and we're also here with Ginger.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
Miss
Miss Sanders, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
Miss Ginger
Good to be here.
Sanders.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to be diving straight into an amazing interview that Sherry had with Dr. Dale Bredesen about what?
Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's and dementia. You don't want to miss it, honestly. It's awesome.
Absolutely. So we want to roll in right now,
Yes.
and we'll see you right afterwards.
We're going to have Dr. Dale Bredesen on here, and he has written a book called The First Survivors of Alzheimer's. And if you know someone that has Alzheimer's or dementia, please watch this, listen to him, take some notes, because he believes that we can turn it around. And we do know that they are coming out with new medicines and new approaches. And we're going to hear from Dr. Bredesen how that's happening. Because let me tell you, I have a husband that has Alzheimer's. And for a caregiver also, it's very hard. You'll be overwhelmed, exhausted, heartbroken also. And we, not just the patient, but the caregiver needs help. And I hope in this program for tonight that you're going to learn a lot of things that's going to help you. So welcome, Dr. Bredesen. And I just want to start out, you know, a lot of people don't know that Alzheimer's is the 7th leading cause of death in the United States. So are we doing anything to help prevent this and to help people to turn around from Alzheimer's or dementia? And is there a difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
Yeah, thank you, Sherry, for having me. And just as you said, you know, to put this in perspective, over 1 million people in the United States died as a result of COVID-19. Of the currently living Americans, about 45 million will die from Alzheimer's disease. So it actually dwarfs the pandemic in terms of the numbers of people involved, unfortunately. And so it's incumbent on all of us to begin to look for earlier ways, prevention and early treatment to get the best outcomes, because we all have the same goal, which is to reduce the global burden of dementia.
Absolutely. Well, is there, like I asked, is there a difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? And are there different types of Alzheimer's or different types of dementia? Or is it just blank Alzheimer's and dementia?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So what happens is dementia means global cognitive decline. So people losing memory, people losing the ability to care for themselves, as you know. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. So when you develop Alzheimer's is actually a pathological term. In other words, it's based on pathology showing plaques and tangles within the brain and loss of volume of the brain. The brain shrinks with a degenerative process. And so when you develop Alzheimer's, it takes many years to get to the dementia part. You go through 4 stages. So the first is where you are asymptomatic. So often in your 30s even, and we used to think of this as a disease of older people, but we now realize it starts much earlier. In some people, you can see early changes in their 20s, believe it or not. So you start early and you go through a period where you could see changes on a PET scan or you could see changes on a spinal tap. But of course, who wants a spinal tap every year to look to see whether you're getting Alzheimer's? Well, the great news is there are now new blood tests that allow us to look earlier. Things like something called phospho-tau 181, and soon another one very sensitive called GFAP, and that'll be out shortly. Those 2 are very helpful to tell you whether you are headed for this. So I think the hope would be everybody will look and see early and then get on active prevention or earliest reversal. The second phase then is called SCI, subjective cognitive impairment. And the good news is that early stage lasts about a decade. So we actually have a long time that we can do something about this. And during that time, the person knows there's something wrong. Often the spouse, sometimes the coworkers say, you know, something's not quite right. Unfortunately, many of our doctors will say, oh, it's just normal aging, but it's really not normal aging. And during that time, which, as I say, lasts about a decade, you're still able to score normally on tests of cognition. So this is why people will say, well, you're still scoring normally, so you're okay. Well, you're already in that second phase, which is why these blood tests are going to be so helpful. So you'll be able to say, this person has it, this person doesn't. The third phase then is called MCI, mild cognitive impairment. And you may have heard that term before, MCI, because it's this thing that precedes the dementia, which is the final phase. Now, MCI, it's too bad they called it mild cognitive impairment, because there's nothing mild about it, unfortunately. It's a little bit like telling someone, don't worry, you only have mildly metastatic cancer. It's a relatively late stage of the Alzheimer's process. 5 to 10% of people with MCI will convert to that fourth and final stage of dementia each year. Now, MCI is defined by now you're scoring abnormally on the testing, but you're still able to perform your activities of daily living. So you can do your checkbook and you can drive and you can take care of yourself. When you start to lose those, you've gone into that fourth and final phase. And then by definition, you have dementia. And as you indicated, Alzheimer's is a cause of dementia. It's the most common one. But yes, there are others. Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and others.
Well, okay, at home, say your spouse, what signs do you look for that someone needs to have these tests that you're speaking of? What would the average person say, oh yeah, I need to take them to go have these tests? What do they look for?
Absolutely. So the typical things are changes in memory. About 2/3 of people start with memory changes. So they'll forget. They may ask you the same question 3 times at dinner one night. They may forget some of the appointments they have. They may forget some of the things going on at work or some of the things going on in your lives. And then about another 1/3 of them have what we call non-amnestic presentation. So it's not about the memory. It's about planning. These are the people that tend to lose their jobs the quickest. They simply cannot plan. They can't do the things that they've done before. Common one I hear is, I got a new iPhone, I just can't figure out how to use this new one, that sort of thing. It can be calculation, where they're having trouble figuring out a tip, for example. It can be getting lost while driving, spatial memory, things like that. It can be word finding, where they'll have trouble coming up with the right word, and they'll start to see, you start to see a big shrinkage in the vocabulary. That is a concern. It can be recognizing objects. Any of those sorts of things tell you something has changed. And so it's really about what you're used to, what has been lost. And again, unfortunately, we've been told so many times, just expect to lose your cognitive abilities as you get a little older. But that should not be the case. And in fact, we need to stay on this. And so, yes, when you see changes, we recommend that just as we all know we should get a colonoscopy when we turn 50, everyone should get a cognoscopy if you're 40 or over. And that's pretty simple to do. You can actually get it online. Cognoscopy, it's looking at some blood tests. It's looking at a simple online cognitive assessment. And then if you have symptoms, it includes an MRI. And if you don't have symptoms, you don't need to get an MRI. You're just there for prevention. So the reality is we should all get this checked out. We should all, just as we try to prevent colorectal cancer by getting in early with a colonoscopy, try to prevent cognitive decline by getting evaluated, doing the right things.
Okay, when I was growing up and a young woman, of course, senior citizen now, we never heard of so much of dementia or Alzheimer's. It was sometimes called old-timers. People just thought it was a natural part of aging. But you're saying that it is not, and that possibly can be reversed or prevented. So if that's the case, what could I do for myself or someone out there listening to prevent these things other than the test? How about diet? Does that
Yeah.
play into it at all?
Such a good point. And actually, just like cancer, the longer you wait, the harder it is to get everything turned around completely. So yes, starting early is better. And as you said, prevention is the best. So there are absolutely things that everyone can do. And then for those who slip through the cracks or who are still continuing and actually develop symptoms, then you need to get a more extensive evaluation. But you're right, everyone can do 7 basic things.
I need to know
And that
them.
is, yep, here they are. Diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, brain training, detox, and some targeted supplements. Now, what do I mean by that? So it turns out that diet actually has a lot to say about whether you develop Alzheimer's. In our research that we did in the laboratory over the last 30 years, what we found is that the disease called Alzheimer's is fundamentally an insufficiency. So it's essentially you are not feeding your synapses, you are not making the connections in your brain function well enough, or you are demanding too much because of ongoing inflammation or exposure to various toxins and things like that. So the diet that actually works best is a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. It doesn't have to be all plants, but a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet, which has good fiber and good phytonutrients.
Like the
And this is what
Mediterranean?
works well.
The
Yes,
Mediterranean
yep.
diet I've read is
Yep.
the mind diet because
Right. So there are several.
it has like the oily fishes like mackerel and salmon and tuna, which I don't understand. Is that because those are rich in omega-3s, which the brain helps the brain? Is that right?
Absolutely. So what happens is that the different kind of fats you have determine largely whether you have ongoing inflammation or whether you have quelled that inflammation and you're actually preventing that. And so you're right, omega-3s are quite good. And also fish will increase your acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter that's associated with memory, so can be very helpful. Now be careful, there are some fish that are very high in mercury. Things like tuna and shark and swordfish. So these are not so good because they give you mercury, unfortunately, which is one of the things that is associated with cognitive decline.
True.
So, but other fish, especially the smallmouth, short-lived fish, things like salmon and mackerel and anchovies and sardines and herring and things like that, quite good for your good fats and things like that.
Absolutely. Well, I hear, though, a lot of negative things about grains now, but it says in the Mediterranean diet that grains are good for you, also for the brain, also nuts and fruits and leafy vegetables. So could someone help themselves just by eating correctly and having a serving of each so many times a week?
Yeah, such a good point. Yeah. So there are 3 different diets that have been used with good results. You mentioned 2 of them. So there's the Mediterranean diet, and there is the MIND diet, and the third one is called KetoFlex 12-3 because it's a ketogenic flexitarian type of diet. The goal here is to make it so that people are sensitive to insulin because so many of us become insulin resistant. And you mentioned the grains. This is an area, because this is a developing field, as you can imagine, there is some controversy. So some physicians prefer whole grains in the diet. Others prefer to avoid grains. They have a positive and a negative. The negative is that some of them can cause leaky gut, so they can actually damage your GI tract. You have to be careful about that. So again, this is a rapidly developing field, and it's one where there's not unanimity of opinion yet.
Well, what about, I have read that there's a new medicine coming out. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce it. I will massacre it if I try. Look, it starts with an L, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course. It's called Leqembi. And what it does is it is an antibody that literally goes into your body and seeks out these plaques in your brain and tries to remove them. And so the idea back in the 1990s made some sense. Let's get rid of what we see in the pathology of an Alzheimer's brain. Doesn't that make sense? Unfortunately, it has not turned out to be the case. So unfortunately, Leqembi, as you'll read, does not make you better, does not keep you the same. What it does is there is a natural decline in people with Alzheimer's, and it slightly slows that decline by 27%. That's all.
Oh.
So unfortunately, it doesn't do much. And in fact, some physicians have said it is clinically insignificant what it actually does to you. At the same time, it has side effects, micro bleeds, so they're actually hemorrhages into the brain, swelling in the brain, and in some cases, there have been people who've died.
So it's life-threatening.
So it is. And I think, in the best case scenario, people would say, well, it's a first step. It's not perfect, but it's a first step. It's also going to cost you around $40,000 per year. So it's extremely expensive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say, it may be a first step, but it's not a great first step. We can do far better. And here's an example. There have been other trials that didn't have as much PR around them than the Leqembi trial, that actually got far better results than Leqembi, that actually made people better. And so there is something just with ketones alone did better. This is from Professor Stephen Kinane in Canada. There's another one with something called combined metabolic activators, where they actually got better results than in the Leqembi trial. And there's a trial that we published last year, freely available online, where we used a precision medicine approach. All of those got better outcomes than with Leqembi.
Well, let me ask you, I've got about a minute left, and I want to ask you a little bit, The First Survivors of Alzheimer's, your book.
Yeah.
Real quickly, tell me something, what's in there and how I can get that and our viewers.
Yes, happy to send you a copy of the book. It's 7 people who were all told they were going to die of Alzheimer's, who all went on the protocol we developed, got much better, and wrote about their stories. And if you can read it without getting a tear in your eye, you're a strong person, because it's really striking to read these stories of people who often had it in their families for generations. So that's the future. We should really be able to reduce this burden of dementia that our society currently carries.
Well, let me ask you this before we go, and then I want you to tell me, can we go to a bookstore and get your book? But does does Alzheimer's last forever? Can it last 15, 20 years? Or is it a fast progressive disease?
It's a good point, because in some people it's fairly quick, but in general it takes years. So as I mentioned earlier, just that second phase, SCI, takes on average 10 years. Then you go into the third phase, which typically lasts about 5 years or so. 5 to 10% each year are converting to that fourth phase, which ends up with people in nursing homes. So it does, unfortunately, it is a terminal illness, and therefore we want to do everything possible to prevent or reverse. And yes, you can get the books. The end of Alzheimer's was the first one, and then also, as you mentioned, the First Survivors of Alzheimer's. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them at Barnes & Noble. Any bookstore should have these.
Dr. Bredesen, thank you so much. I so appreciate all your information and your good work. Keep it up, please. We so need it.
Welcome back to Friends and Neighbors. And Sherry, that was a very informative interview.
Oh gosh, it was one of the best I think that's ever been on the show, because it was so informative, because so many people don't understand Alzheimer's and dementia, and they don't know what to do. They don't know where to start. I know I did it. And he was a veritable plethora of information. I so enjoyed that.
I know, it's a joy to be able to tap into that mind frame of like all the knowledge that he's accumulated, for us to be able to know what we can do now
to help that loved one, and for the caregiver too.
Absolutely, absolutely. But we also have Miss Sanders with us.
Yes.
It's always good to have you on the set with us.
Thank you.
I
It's
love
always good
Ginger.
to be here, and I love to come and share God's stories.
I know. Well, you got a story.
I know. Tell
wanna
us
hear
some
it.
God stories.
I do.
Yes.
Well, Demi and I traveled around with the Billy Graham team for several years, and after the earthquake in Haiti, And this story just comes to the top of my God moments. And I like to hear Sandra, she says aha moments. Well, this one just kept rolling.
Wow.
And so we went down after the earthquake and was in Haiti. Actually, we got there several months and went back home and then went back down. And we were there when cholera had hit.
Ooh.
And we were there 3 months, October, November, into December.
3 months?
3 months, living in a tent on a compound.
When
But-
there's a cholera outbreak.
Yes, we had blue Billy Graham Rapid Response shirts, our chaplain shirts, and we had to wash in bleach water, so they turned purple with white splotches.
Oh my goodness.
And we had to walk through Clorox mats to go in and out of our compound because cholera was so bad.
Yeah.
And so, but one story, one day, we were at the hospital, which is made with a tent, and it's where wonderful doctors and nurses from all around the world were coming to volunteer with these patients. And Denny and I were in one area, and they came and got us, one of the Haitian pastors, and said, can you come and pray? This lady has just lost her baby. The baby girl died of cholera. And he actually wanted us to go out back to what they were using as a morgue to pray over this baby. And we told him, we don't do that. We know where that baby is. If she's dead, she's already gone on with the Lord. But we'll be glad to pray with the other patients or even with this family. And he said, the mother has gone home already because the baby had died this morning. But we would like for you all to come and go to the house with us. Well, Denny and I didn't know anything else to do but go get in this car with this man driving us through the streets of Haiti, which was sort of dumb. We don't recommend anybody doing that because we didn't know where we were or where we were going. And we ended up walking down this alley, and the concrete was all broken from the earthquake, and we were in the middle of a mess. And we get to this compound house. It had a concrete fence around the house, and he opened these big old iron gates, and Denny and I walked in. And the courtyard of that house was full of people. And when I say full, 30 to 40 people were standing there, and they pointed us to where the mother was, and she was literally laying on what used to be the porch. It was broken concrete, and people were waving fronds over her because it was so hot, probably 100 degrees. And as they were doing that, she was wailing and crying, mourning her baby.
Sure.
And Denny and I walked in, and we walked right down the middle of these people, and they just opened up. And I go up and I tell her, your baby is with the Lord. It's okay. Do you want to know how you can be there with your baby? And she sat up, and she looked at me, and she wiped her eyes, and I told her about Jesus. And I said, would you like to pray that prayer? Do you know that Jesus can save you and you can go be with your baby? And she said, yes. And we prayed, and I led her in a prayer that Jesus, she knew who Jesus was and he would forgive her sins. She prayed with me. And as I turned around, I said, if anybody else, because you could have heard a pin drop in that courtyard, all sound was gone. I said, did anybody else in this courtyard pray this prayer? And 11 people raised their hand.
Praise God.
From about a 9-year-old boy to a 70 or 80-year-old man raised their hand.
Oh, God.
After that, we walked out, and I wanted to find her. Her name was Delta because I wanted to give her a Bible. We couldn't find her, but there's more to the story. And I want to come back and just tell you that we got to go back, and when we found her again, it was through her husband. He came to the clinic 2 months later, and we were back down in Haiti. And they came and they said, this man is sick with cholera. We go, and lo and behold, it was Delta's husband. We had no idea.
Wow.
And he said, you're the ones that came to my house when our baby girl died. And I said, yes. He said, my wife told me about you telling her about Jesus. We got the Haitian pastor. He came. He told me about Jesus, and I too have Jesus in my heart.
Oh, praise God.
Now, can you imagine how God put that all together? How out of all the people in Haiti, we ended up meeting back. And I said, well, I want to give her a Bible. And he said, yes, yes. He called her, and he said, she will meet you in the market. We leave, and we go to the market, and there she was. I was able to see her again and give her this Bible. But there's even more to the story. Their baby had a twin, a little boy, and the baby was still living. That is totally God.
Yes.
For him to orchestrate all and order your steps
yes.
for you to do that is
Over a
holy.
span of 5 months.
Oof.
And that story has a moose in it that we were able to give a little stuffed moose to her, as well as the Bible to give to the little boy. And if you go to billygraham.org and type in a moose in Haiti, that story is there on the Billy Graham website.
Oh,
A
my
moose
A moose.
in Haiti
A moose in Haiti.
is a billygraham.com.
.org. Billygraham.org.
I've got to
A moose
do
in
that.
Haiti.
know.
Y'all gotta
We'll
do
have to
it.
hop
Yeah.
online and do that.
That is
So-
God. He orchestrates our lives.
That's right.
He does.
really
He
does.
sets it up.
He does. And when we are connected to him and we're obedient and we actually take the steps with what the Holy Spirit directs us, it's like riding his coattails.
Oh, yeah.
Ginger, thank you for sharing
Thank
that
you.
story
Love
with
sharing my
us. And
stories.
thank you for joining us on this episode of Friends and Neighbors. I
Yes.
pray that it was educational, inspirational to you. Most importantly, that you felt the Spirit of the Lord.
Lord.
We'll see you next time on the Friends and Neighbors program.
Bye.